Now, to talk more about the future of the US role in the region, is it going to be a new role or is it going to be a continuation of what it has been doing in the region and the way it has been involving itself in the region? We've been joined by two guests. One joins us in the studio, the other on Skype. In the studios, we've been joined by Professor Ejaz Akram. He's a professor of religion and world politics. Thank you very much, Professor Akram Saab, to have joined us here in the studios. It's a pleasure to have you for our show. And our second guest who joins us is Professor Martin Jacques. He's an author and a journalist. Professor Martin, thank you very much to have joined us as well. Let's begin with you, Professor Ejaz Akram. Putting as a benchmark or as a base what is happening at the G7 summit, the way the US is trying to realign other countries of the G7 against China or in parallel to China's Belt and Road Initiative, how do you foresee, I mean, if you put that as a benchmark, how do you foresee the future role of the United States of America in the region?
Yes, this is a very important question, Umar Saab, and I must say, give you my bottom line first, that the United States is losing its significance in the world affairs that it once used to possess. I don't take this current G7 summit very seriously in its outcomes because it's an attempt, it could be a desperate attempt to cement the previously fractured relationships within Europe and America. So the transatlantic alliance, which was fractured by mutual distrust, and the United States' role as to bludgeon into submission its allies, and the Europeans do not like that. Most recently, as you know, the US administration, elements in the US administrations were found guilty in spying on its allies and by tapping their phone calls. So obviously the Europeans were not like that. Now,
but they're trying to get their help and their assistance.
Yes, so Biden's, when we look at Biden was trying to say that we're trying to resuscitate the Western alliance. The issue is that that Western alliance, which one day used to be it used to be powerful and it used to be considered legitimate, is somehow losing its luster because it is now facing a crisis of legitimacy where the soft power of the West in general, but the United States in particular, is in danger.
All right. Professor Martin, do you feel that the US or the West is losing its luster or its dominance over world politics?
Yes, very much so. I think that the underlying reason for this, I think, is that the United States is just that much less important economically in the world now. I mean, it commands something like 16% of the global economy, or accounts for that. And this is obviously now less than China in terms of primary purchasing power. And if you look at the G7 meeting at the weekend, then even if you put Europe and America together, they only account for about 31% of global GDP. So you've got this picture of really the diminishing role, the diminishing reach, the diminishing potential of the United States. And everyone can see this. And there's another aspect to this, actually, and that is, if you go back 20, 30 years, the United States was a big trading power. You know, it had a lot of countries look to America for trade and for export markets. And now America is really a relatively small player in this field. It's no longer an important market in the way that it was in the past. Of course, essentially, it's been supplanted by China. So I think you've got this picture, which is very different from, if you go back to the 1970s and G7, I mean, in a way, the G7 ran the world. And today, no, it doesn't run the world anymore. It has become a Western faction. It's not more than that. And quite frankly, all the time, really during the conference, you could feel them, looking over their shoulders, especially Americans, of course, at China. So we're going through an extraordinary shift in terms of global power.
All right. Extraordinary shift. This is what Professor Martin says. Now, Professor Ejaz, in this extraordinary shift or global repositioning, whose hard or soft power is more attractive to the powers that be, the other powers that be in the world, whether it be the United Kingdom or the European Union or other important countries in the world?
I think that certainly if we say hard power comes from your military and your military prowess comes from your economics. In that arena, I would say that China certainly is by leaps and bounds has grown. But then what you do with that hard power, you need soft power. If you do something bad with that hard power, then you cover it with the soft power, which the United States has done many times. But you know, you used to build things in Europe. You used to build dams in Pakistan, which no longer does because its foreign policy has been so aggressive that since 9/11 it has bombed, raided, and occupied so many Muslim countries that it's no longer has the face-saving mechanism that is needed to actually for your soft power to work on something. Its own race relations are disastrous inside the United States. It's, if you look at the example of the pandemic, I mean, they've been very selfish about the production and distribution of the vaccines. If you look at human rights, it supports one of the egregious abusers of human rights in the Middle East.
Well, they have said in the G7 summit that they're going to distribute 1 billion vaccines or so to step up. And of course, they're also talking of climate change as well. But there seems to be some kind of change for the better as far as COVID vaccines or climate change is concerned. But as far as the global repositioning is concerned, and of course, attracting the other countries to, I mean, and this whole, you know, either you go with China or you go with the United States of America, what's going to be the future?
I think that the, you know, let's take the example of the Blue Dot network that they have proposed for $40 trillion, as opposed to a few $1 billion of China, or say over $1 trillion of Chinese initiative or BRI. Where was the United States for so long? Did they not have the full control of the sea routes and land routes and the institutions, the global institutions that run? They could have done the Blue Dot network 70 years ago, where they had greater wherewithal.
Why now?
To do
Because
that.
they just want to counter the BRI.
They just want to counter, and these are all promises. So I would not take the American promise seriously because they've acted irresponsibly and they reneged their deals that they make with countries.
Now, Professor Martin, you know, India has been invited to the G7 summit, so has Australia, South Africa. Why haven't Russia and China been invited to it? Shouldn't they have been invited to have a more global perspective as far as the future of global politics or global realignment is concerned?
Well, I think the reason is actually quite simple, which is that especially the United States regards both China and Russia, although they're rather different, of course, as the problem, the enemy in this situation. So they don't want to include them. Of course, if they were, if America was in a really expansive phase, which it is certainly not, but if it was, then it would invite them. But they don't, you know, but that would essentially, Biden came to the G7 saying, you know, I want to reconstruct the Western alliance pre-Trump, and I want also to concentrate on how to deal with China, which is the main enemy. Of course, really, if you look at the communique, that he didn't put it off, because the Europeans are not going along with that. The Europeans have a different interest, whereas the United States American interest is essentially a concern to preserve its global hegemony, which of course it will not be able to do. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, the Europeans, they don't have that interest. They're not in the they once were, but they're no longer in the hegemonic game. The European interest is, how can our relationship with China enhance our future growth and prosperity? These are two very different positions.
That is so true. That is so true. Professor Ejaz, now coming to China and the US and their global realignment and their, of course, their friendship or their concentration as far as certain countries are concerned, the SCO summit is going to be held later this year. We are seeing the G7 summit being held now. Now, in this tussle of power, who's going to win in your point of view?
I think the Chinese see it differently. They don't see in terms of winning and losing as such. SCO, for example, if you look at SCO, China has, and along with Russia and many countries, it's not an exclusive club. It is a very inclusive platform on which many nations have been welcomed, and I think many more will come, including in the foreseeable future. The United States of America wants to cooperate with China and with Russia. I think it'll be so much better for the American people. But the reason that the US elite thinks very differently in exclusive terms. It's a win-lose situation.
In this global scenario, can you think exclusively?
Yes, I mean, when you think exclusively, then you're building walls around yourself.
Exactly.
And when
can you afford to think in that manner?
And when you build too tight walls around you, then you realize that you yourself have been isolated from the rest of the world. So I think this is something that the Americans need to take very seriously. That inclusive approach. For example, in SEO, they've very clearly stipulated that terrorism, separatism, extremism are the problems, and the U.S. foreign policy is an instrument. It's a tool of generating these things that that SEO is trying to counter.
Now, Professor Martin, if, for example, we've seen in the past that China has rewritten the rules of history or the rules of economy or geostrategy or geoeconomy as we speak, if it continues to rewrite the rules of the game, do you feel that the West, in particular the US, is going to lose its relevance?
No, I don't think the United States and the West will lose their relevance. I mean, America's going to be, still a substantial player for some time to come. But you can feel America's now really on the defensive in all sorts of different ways. Ejaz has just, I think, made a very good illustration of this. And you see, the old American way, and it's deeply rooted in American history, is a kind of Manichaean view, good and evil. You are my friend or you are my enemy. And you can see this consistently. Bush is handling...
You are with us or you are against us, if you remember that quote.
Yeah. I mean, Bush's handling of Iraq, was, it's good and evil. And this is... And handling G7 now, well, we don't want autocratic, by which he means China and Russia, regimes, because they are our enemies in this situation. Now, this is thinking that isn't going to this is thinking which is going to be more and more problematic for them, because the Chinese are much more subtle. They have a different view. They don't think in those terms, as Ejaz was saying. And the Chinese approach is essentially, give you another example. RCEP, the huge new agreement, trading agreement in East Asia. I mean, it's got all kinds of countries there, even Australia, Japan, South Korea, and so on. This is a very, very diverse set, whereas America is pursuing a very different kind of approach. So in this world that we're moving into, I think America doesn't really know how to handle it. American is essentially a zero-sum game.
That's a very important perspective that you've pointed out. Professor Ejaz, Akram, the Blue Dot Network, this is what you pointed out as well. Right. This is of course, at the G7 summit, also one of the highlights of the discussion between the powers that are present there, and of course discussing different important issues. Do you feel it's going to be a viable alternative to the BRI, to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor?
No, I don't think so, because it's right now it's only about its talk. So we don't know any details about it. BRI has a very long thinking behind it. It manifested in 2015, but its manifestation is it's a reflection of the guiding philosophy of China towards its international relations, and it's not only Chinese, it's now also Russian. And Russia has transformed itself and going back towards its different type of identity. And then you have a significant chunk of the non-Arab Muslim world, which is part of this group. So BRI, if you look at historical terms, is nothing new, because the Silk Road has been around for a long, long time.
True.
And so, but the Blue Dot Network has yet to reveal what type of control mechanism and what type of harvest is the West in general will try to reap with this. So until the details come out, it is very difficult to comment on that. But the amount of money that they have promised is very staggering. However, the Blue Dot Network, if it promises connectivity, which it should, then it can only reinforce the BRI. Then why spend $40 trillion redundant amount of money on something that China is willing to spend anyway. So I think that if the aim is collectivity, welfare, and cooperation amongst the peoples of the world, then both should converge. So that remains to be seen whether they will converge or not.
All right. Professor Martin Jacques, my last question to you is twofold. I mean, 19th century United Kingdom, 20th century US, 21st century China. How are they perceived or being perceived by the other nations across the world? And finally, what kind of a role, in your point of view, is Pakistan going to have in all of this scenario? We've seen the amount of demands that the US has put to Pakistan as the process of withdrawal from Afghanistan is underway. Which kind of policy options do you feel does Pakistan have as far as the future of this region is concerned?
Well, first, on your first part of your question, which is how the UK, the US, and China are perceived. I mean, I think this is, well, Britain is, let's be straightforward about this. Britain was, a huge colonizer. At its peak, it colonized 25% of the world's population and landmass. And essentially, Britain has never been able to, what should we say, get beyond this history, which is, it deeply marks British thinking to this day. Indeed, I mean, Britain has never really exited the thinking of an imperial power, which is one of the reasons why it seeks always a very close relationship with the United States. I think America is in a different situation in the sense that America is still remains a very important power. But, America over the last period, what shall we say, around the 90s and the turn of the century and into this century, has got into bigger and bigger trouble. I mean, all the wars it's fought, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and so on, have failed. And one of them, as we know, is the longest war that America has ever fought. And America, more than any other country by far, was responsible for the worst financial crisis since 1931, namely the financial crisis in 2007 to 9. So America people's respect for America has been declining. Now, China's in a very different situation because China is, and I think this is absolutely critical point, that China's relationship with the developing world is the axis, in my view, on which the future is going to be constructed. In other words, the subject of global governance and global change will be a majority of the world's population. That's never been true in the past. You've had these hegemons like the UK, like the US, which represented a relatively small part of humanity. Now we're moving into a situation. Why can China think like this? Because China was partially colonized itself. So it sees an affinity with countries that have been in this situation. And furthermore, China still remains, despite its great development, a developing country. So it has this sense of affinity with the developing world in the contemporary sense as well. And I think this puts China in a tremendous advantage because its whole strategy is not geared to the West. It's geared to its relationship with the developing countries. That's what Belt and Road tells us, I mean, which is the sort of pinnacle of this kind of development. A most extraordinary, actually, in my view, brilliant strategy, which has got the West on the defensive. Now, on Pakistan, I mean, well, actually, Pakistan, of course, is in a rather good position in many ways, which is that it has had a long relationship with China, a close relationship with China. And of course, this Pakistan is probably, maybe, I don't know, the most important single participant vis-a-vis China in Belt and Road. So I think the opportunities for Pakistan in the future are strong. And it can always, it enjoys the relationship with China. This is very important.
So Pakistan enjoys that relationship with China. Thank you very much, Professor Martin. Professor, just very quick response. Yes. Pakistan, China, Pakistan, US, which relationship is going to emerge stronger?
I think definitely Pakistan and China. And I can just, last comment I can give you, I'm a Pakistani American who spent all of his life in America. And since last many years, I've been deeply in a process of socialization inside China. And I'm serving many institutions there. And I know what is Islamic civilization from inside and my own country, Pakistan. And there is absolutely no question that you have to jump off the sinking Titanic and you have to honor your old age relationships which have benefited you. This is the call of the common sense, and I hope that our ruling elite will realize that sooner than later.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Ejaz Akram. Thank you very much, Professor Martin Jacques, to have joined us for this very important subject, that is the US reassessment in the whole region and the whole world politics, especially after its withdrawal from Afghanistan. How it's going to be? Will it still continue to play a role? Will it still be pressurizing Pakistan directly or indirectly? Or will China continue to have a stronger role to play in the future of the region and the future of Afghanistan? Only time will tell. Till then, Umar Khalid bids you farewell from this episode of Newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories and segments that matter to you and to us. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.